Today, I'm making Viking Blood, which is really mead. Mead is honey, water, and yeast. But then if you add fruit, it becomes a melomel. So it's honey, water, fruit, and yeast. And this one's made with cherries. So that's why it's Viking Blood. It's like from way, 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 way back. Not to be confused with this, which is, I think you pronounce that blood. I don't know. I speak English and I even do that pretty poorly sometimes. I'm sure this is a fine product. I mean, we own it. So how, it must be good, but they're not the same thing at all. So if you were looking for that, I'm sure there's other videos on YouTube that explain how to make this. I'm not making this today. I'm making real Viking blood. Sorry to all the people who really like the other one. Now, being a mead, this doesn't require a lot of ingredients, but it does require some equipment and things like that. I'm going to give you a full description of everything I use below in the description, and as well as all the quantities and things like that. So you can just sit back and relax. Everything's covered. First, we want to talk about sanitation. Now, back in the day, they didn't know a thing about sanitation. They actually thought that the stirring stick was magic. I'm not kidding. They didn't know what yeast was. So all they knew is that if they used this certain stick, it attracted the wild yeast, and that caused fermentation faster than if they just left an open vat walking around in the house. That's really how they made mead. Not anymore today. Today, you want to use Star Sand. There's a lot of other really great products. And what you do, you just soak everything in there, everything you're going to use, every funnel, every little piece of equipment, anything you're going to use, put it in there. What I suggest, keep a big bucket or your sink full of it, because I always forget something. I'm thinking everybody else will too. A couple things you want to do before you start this is you want to take your honey, which we're using 3 pounds, two 24-ounce containers today. You want to put that in like hot water, not really boiling. I don't like to boil my honey. Some people do. I don't. I want to warm it so that it pours easy. And I'm using frozen cherries. Now, you could use fresh ones. Totally good. You got to pull all those pits and everything. It's a little bit of a pain, but the frozen cherries, I got them at Publix. It's awesome. 3 pounds of frozen cherries. Look at that. See, that looks like blood. That's where they get the name from. Blood and maybe entrails. I don't know. Anyway, so you want to mash these up real good. The more you mash the cherries, the more juice you get out, the more flavor you get into the meat. Okay, one other thing that you might want to do before you get started is take a little bit of water and put your yeast in a cup. I got one right here, and that's called hydrating the yeast. Um, I'll have the type of yeast that I'm using. It's a Lalvin KV and a bunch of numbers. I forget, but it's good to 18%, and it's really good for taking the fruity flavors in meats. It'll be in the description. Sorry about that. Next step, put it all together. We got our fermentation vessel here. It says ale pail on it. Forget that. Today, it's a mead bucket. Now, this is a food grade bucket. You want to make sure that whatever you use is food grade. A lot of people will ferment in carboys. I did too, until just recently I learned something really, really interesting. By doing it in this, I have more oxygen. I can get to it much easier. And I like to do 1 gallon batches because, I get bored and want something new after like a week. So having, 5 gallons of something laying around is just way too much for me. So we do 1 gallon. But if you do 1 gallon and you fill it half with cherries that you have to remove, now you only end up with like half a gallon of stuff. Well, that kind of sucks. So I've started doing this just recently. I'm going to put everything in here, and that way I can fill it up to wherever it ends up, as long as it's not more than 5 gallons. And I'm going to have 1 gallon of product at the end. Makes sense, right? So we're going to start. This is very technical, so pay attention. Cherries in the bucket. I'm wearing a red shirt on purpose because I didn't want to get any on me. And I'm using a spatula because these are not cheap. And, this is where a lot of your flavor is coming from. So I'm just trying to scoop all the goodness out of there and get every bit of cherry juice. And I'm sorry, this is really hard to get on camera. But you can see that. All right. I think that's enough. I'll put that to the side. Give you a view down the bucket if you want to see it. Looks like blood to me. I'm pretty sure Vikings had red blood too. I mean, they're just people after all. Now comes the honey. Now I'm using clover honey. You can use wildflower if you really want to, but here's the thing. If you use a stronger flavor of honey, it could overpower the cherries. This is called a cherry mead, not a mead cherry. So you want the cherry to really come forward, right? So I warmed it so it does this. Look at that. See, it just pours right out. It's going to take about an hour to get all that in there. I'm not going to show you what it looks like in here now. You don't want to see it. What I am going to do, though, is these stop dripping all over the place on me. Stop making a mess. Come on, stop. I am going to pour some water. Now, this is reverse osmosis water. You can use any filtered type water. I mean, any good water. Basically, you don't want chlorine, and you don't want crap in it. Like you don't want fluoride and all that crazy stuff. So if your tap water smells kind of iffy, don't use that. Use filtered water. I'm just giving this a little bit of a shake, get most of that honey out. You can never get all of it. And of course, you pour anything less than hot water in there, it crystallizes honey and makes it that much harder. Just get a little bit in there. Shake it up real good. Pour it in. Okay. Now, as you can see, if you look at the side here, that's where the level is. It's almost up to a gallon already. However, I want a gallon of product when it's done. So I'm actually going to fill this with a full gallon of water. Well, what's left of the gallon from what I did already. So that's right here. Again, I sanitized this pitcher. Everything's been sanitized. And as I fill this up, you see that level? It's almost up to 2 gallons. But remember one thing, in about a week, maybe 10 days, I'm going to have to remove all these cherries. So it's not going to be 2 gallons. All right. Spoon, sanitized spoon. Stir this up. That honey still has to blend together. This might take a minute. Now, one thing while you're doing this is yeast is pretty specific. It doesn't like to be too hot, doesn't like to be too cold. That's why you keep it in the fridge until you're ready to use it, and you don't drop it into boiling water because it'll die. You want this to be somewhere in the like 60 to 90 degree range. If it's more than 110, you're killing your yeast. If it's below 60, they're not going to be as active, so it's not as good. I know in Nordic lands they probably did it in 50 degrees. Well, guess what? We don't have to worry about that. Unless you live somewhere where it's 50 degrees, well, then make do. So I'm just going to use my handy dandy little temp gun here. And mine's coming out at 72 degrees, which means inside it's probably a little bit better than that. The only reason why it would be too cold is because I used frozen cherries that had to sit out for a long time. I was shocked. After 2 hours, they were still 17 degrees. Crazy. Anyway, so now they're not frozen anymore. Everything's in here. The next thing we're going to do is take what's called a gravity reading. And that's how we figure out how much alcohol is going to be in our final mead. Okay, so what I did is I filled up this measuring tube. This has a spigot on it, but it was kind of complicated to show on camera. And all I did is I filled up a tube. I didn't really think it needed to be documented that highly. Anyway, the next thing we're going to do is a hydrometer reading. It makes me feel like a mad scientist, and it's just, it's something fun. So what you do is you put this in, and hopefully I won't overfill it. And there's readings down the side. Oh, look at that. Here we are. Okay, so once you put that in, it floats to a certain level, and there's a gravity reading on here that you can read. And this is reading 1084, 1.084, which if I even look at this, it tells me what that can come out to. Somewhere in it's going to be like maybe 13-14% alcohol when it's finished. So, that's pretty reasonable. It was supposed to be a little bit higher, but I actually used a touch more water in here than I really should have. So it diluted it just slightly, but it's okay. Now, some people throw this away. I'm not some people. This was sanitized. It's clean. Okay, the next thing you want to do is make sure, and this is why we use a big bucket, you get some air in here, okay? I stirred it good before, but I'm going to stir it rough. I want air in there. The first couple of days of any fermentation, you want oxygen in your must. You know what must is, right? This is must. Same like wine, because technically mead is honey wine. So this is honey cherry wine, right? Okay, the only thing that's left is to put in the yeast. Now, if you listen to what I said to do, you have yeast over here. hydrating in some water. See how it's all cloudy and right? Great. So what we want to do is mix that up a little bit. Don't get anything on the bottom. And then pour it in. This is called pitching the yeast. I'm not going to do like, never mind. Just get it in there. If there was any little extras, make sure you get it all in. And I'm going to mix that around again one more time. Get it all in there. Get my lid. As you can tell, this lid is officially made for brewing. Got the little hole. Put that on top. Now, some people will say you shouldn't put a lid on tight. We have cats, so I disagree with that statement for my house. Now, the final step is once you have your cap on, you have everything in there, to put in an airlock. I'm going to talk about this for just a second. What this does is it allows the gas, which the yeast is making, to force its way up, push this level down, and push this level up, and then it bubbles through and goes out. Now, some people will say, oh, just put like fabric over it. No. Some people will say, put a balloon on it. No. This is $3. You can use it for years. Trust me, a pack of balloons is going to be $3. You get to use them one time. This is better. What it actually does, stick it right in here. It prevents bugs that you don't want getting into your stuff. Okay. Now, what you want to do also for the first couple of days, give this a shake every once in a while. Maybe even take the lid off, get some air in there, just like the first 2-3 days tops. I am not one of those people that believes you have to use all these chemicals, you have to use all these preservatives and finings and stuff. If you really want to do that, that's cool. I'm not one of those people, so I just drink stuff that I like to make, right? Okay. Now, as far as time, there's a couple of steps that have to go with this. This particular batch, because it's mead and has cherries in it, in like a week to 10 days, I got to get those cherries out of there, okay? And because I don't want them sitting on it if it got moldy or anything, that's just bad. So I'm going to take them out. They've given up all they're going to give. They'll probably be white even when they come out. It's kind of crazy. So all of their juice is in there. I have high hopes for this one. This is my own recipe. I pained over it for days trying to put it together. Derica can attest to that. She was laughing at me. But I want this to come out a certain way. I'm really fond of cherries. I'm really fond of mead. So I figured, put them together. And then I found they call it Viking's Blood. And I was like, hey, we got to make this.
So here we are, pretty much ready to rack this. This is the part 2 of the Viking Blood. And what I've actually done is I just took a little bit of a reading here. And here you can see in the tube what it looks like. And right there, you can see that 0.998. Yeah, 998, maybe 999 even. It's pretty darn close. I'm going to call it 999 just because I like the sound of that better. So here we have a really simple setup for racking. And racking, I mean, if you didn't know, it just means taking from one container and putting into another. A lot of the time you're racking it off of lees, which is like the yeast at the bottom. Or in this case, I'm getting the cherries out. I'll open the bucket in a little bit so you can see that. But real simple, I just use this bucket that has a spigot on it and open it up and let it flow. Now, it's not going to go all the way to the bottom, and that's okay, because I'm going to just tip it up a little bit so I can get the rest of that. But as you can see, it's just flowing into the bottle. Real simple. Look at that color. Icy cherry red. That's exactly what it should be. And this is what we racked off of. This is basically all the dead cherries and lots of the yeast. And there might be a little bit of mead in the bottom there, but I'm really not going to worry about it. Now, I did pull it to the side and everything, so I got some yeast in there, but that's okay because this is bulk aging / secondary or even tertiary fermentation at this point. And there you see we have it all in a new bottle, packed off. Now, I know some people are going to have a problem with the amount of headspace that's in there. The way I see it, I got that yeast all active again, so I think there's a good amount of carbon dioxide in there. I'm not too worried. But here we go. Here's my notes. Started on April 26th. Here we are, May 11th, and it's at 0.999. Now, if you're curious, That's 11.2% alcohol right now. So that's not too bad. I could actually stop it right here, just let it kind of settle out, do its thing. Because right now it's a little cloudy. I'm not really worried about it getting any stronger. I don't really think it's going to. I think the fermentation is pretty much done. But at this point, it'll just start to clear out a little bit better and in time become an amazing Viking's Blood Mead. This is my very fancy labeling of Viking Blood. Now, what we're going to do, because it's already bottled, as you can tell, it's in a bottle, we're going to taste it. And we're going to tell you all the stuff that I did wrong. Not the stuff that other people told me in the comments that I did wrong. All the stuff that I know I did wrong, that I would have done differently, that I would have actually done. Not some of the stuff that people suggested. Like, I'm not putting chemicals. I don't do any of that stuff. Let me explain. People have been making mead and alcohol for 5,000 years. I mean, I heard this statement today. Mead is the OG of alcohol. I just thought that was awesome because it's like the first alcohol man ever made. Okay. So they literally took some honey and some water and poured it in a big pot and left it out. And it made mead and they drank it and they lived to tell the story. When you take it from that level, anything that we do today is going to be better than that. Okay. They literally didn't understand how yeast worked. It was alembic because it was just all wild yeast. They thought the stick that they stirred it with was magical. In a way, they were kind of right because the yeast would get embedded in that stick and it got passed down from generation to generation. And with each successive batch that they made, more yeast got embedded. So they actually had a better strain of yeast working on their mead. Neat, right? They called it a magic stick. I got a comment today. Somebody asked if I used a magic spoon. I thought that was awesome. I said, maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I don't know. Anyway, so the general gist is this. We made the Viking Blood. When I first tasted it, when I was getting ready to rack it, it wasn't good. In hindsight, I think it was better than I thought it was at the time. But what I did was we racked it. I let that sit for several more weeks. And then I got some tart cherry juice. Now that word tart, that's the important part because all the cherries that were put in this were tart cherries, not sweet cherries. So in my head, I'm thinking, ooh, cherry juice. When I tasted it, didn't taste like cherries to me. In hindsight, now thinking, if I thought tart cherries in my head, it would taste like tart cherries. Kind of like if you've ever had a hard cider, a dry hard cider. If you think it's going to taste like Angry Orchard or some of the other stuff out there, no. But if you think beer and then drink that hard cider, it tastes really good because that's more of what it tastes like is beer. It's a little more bitter. It's not as sweet. And that's what this turned out to be, kind of that idea. It's still got some sweetness to it, but it's actually got that strong cherry tart flavor with the honey as a backbone. So anyway, I'm going to open the bottle. We're going to pour some and we're going to drink while you guys watch. Sorry, we don't have taste division. Otherwise, I'd totally share this with you. We have several bottles. You hear there was a little bit of a fizz there. A lot of the time, if I don't degas like for hours and hours and hours, a little bit of CO2 stays dissolved in there. We had a bottle of wine that was sparkling wine. We didn't know. Friend opened it up and it just went all over the place. And yes, it really went all over the place. All right, I'm going to be a gentleman. Pour hers first. Now you want to be careful whenever you do a homemade brew like this because you're always going to, I could pour more if you want. It depends how much you want to drink. You're always going to have a little bit of sediment at the bottom. So you want to be very careful and make sure that the neck of your bottle doesn't go too high. Like don't just dump it no matter what vessel you're putting it into. Now, the first thing I want to say is the color on this stuff is really awesome. I mean, it really looks, it's a blood red. It's a strong, strong red color. It's really nice. By the way, don't you love the New Orleans glasses? These are for whiskey, but this isn't whiskey.
That's whiskey.
We should toast. Sláinte. She says other words. So, when you smell it.
Smells like cherry.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Actually has a really strong cherry smell, way more than it did. Now, something to remember. This was bottled on the 13th of July. However, I think it was started back in March or April. So it's been sitting for quite some time. It sat in the full carboy for weeks, just because I wanted to give it more age and let it sit and let it get better and better and better. And I think the age really did help this tremendously. But anyway, the on the nose, strong cherry. I mean, it's almost like take tart cherries and honey mixed together, which shocker, right? But yeah, I totally get that. Get a little bit of alcohol smell too. I estimate this as 10%. It might be 11 or 12. It's hard to say because of all the extra juicing I did and the fruits. I didn't really feel like going through a whole calculation. So I put 10% on the bottle.
We recently did a tour of France through wines class, and I found out some interesting things. I learned a lot in that class, and one of the things that I learned is that I really don't like French wine. No offense to the glorious nation of France, but
smells like feet.
It's
That's what you kept saying.
I know. The more and more we were drinking, the more my notes and profiles were.
Everything was in reference to how much feet it smelled like.
Yeah. So
not as much like feet.
When this was very green before Brian continued his augmentation of this, it did have a strong foot note. But now, and that's why he's making fun of me for me saying that it smelled like cherries, I'm not getting any of that foot.
Yeah, it's gone.
Note.
And that sulfur dioxide sometimes gets it's residual in the liquid, and that's why it starts to come out. But there's also different reactions that happen and things like that. But the sulfur dioxide will actually give it that weird footy smell and sometimes taste. It comes out a lot in hard ciders, not so much in meads in my experience, but it does happen.
You do get a little bit of the alcohol scent, but it's not a strong phenolic. It's not like fingernail polish remover or anything like that. Some of the really strong stuff, you'll smell it, and that's all you get in the nose is that alcohol scent.
I can really put my nose in there. It's no big deal.
Yeah, this is
then
nice.
Again, this is weaker than whiskey, so I'm fine.
But I really do get the cherry and then the honey and then a little bit of the alcohol.
I'm tasting it.
All right.
Wow, if you let it sit in your mouth for a minute, it really is. It's cherry, but that honey is still there. This is actually really good.
But if you notice in our high class labeling here, I did put tart cherry right on the label.
Yeah.
Because that's that psychological thing. If you just read cherry and you think sweet cherry, when you taste this, it's really going to be a shock to the system. You're going to be like, whoa, what is... Because your cheeks kind of pucker in because it's got that sharp tartness.
What's interesting is I used frozen cherry, so I used the whole cherry, the except for the pits, they were pitted, but it had the skins and the pulp, and I can taste a little bit of the tannins in this that I didn't before, but that helps to round it out a little bit. It gives it a little bite. When you first put it in your mouth, immediately you get that tart cherry immediately, and then as it sits for a little bit, it starts to get sweeter, and then the finish is nice and clean, nothing big, and then it has that little bit of the tannic. It's not as tannic as some things. It's not like swallowing sandpaper.
It's kind of that astringent.
It's an astringent, just final little bit.
Almost like you get when you drink tea.
Yeah, not even that much though.
Right.
It's a little weaker than like a black tea astringency. Yeah. This came out much better than I thought it was going to. I have to say, I enjoy it a lot more now than the first time. It has 0 foot smell, and that's going to be my new measuring stick whenever I do a tasting. How much foot does it have? I like that. Anyway, so this came out really, really good. Anybody that has any questions on the methodology, I know it's kind of convoluted and it was weird and I didn't record all of it, and I'm sorry. Life gets in the way sometimes. And I honestly, because I wasn't happy with it, I was pretty much hoping it would just go away and people would ignore it. Meanwhile, this video now has 24,000 views. So, obviously, it was something that people are interested in, so I thought, okay, let's do this. I may do it again someday. I might make another one and do it a little cleaner, a little better, and use a slightly different methodology and come out with a better product. There's also talk of, in the beginning of the Viking Blood video, I said, this is not Viking Blood, and I held up the bottle and all that. Well, I know how to make that stuff too. I mean, it's hibiscus and, it has some other stuff. Well, we grow hibiscus in the backyard, and I'm planning to grow some hops for next year. So it's entirely possible that I might make our own version of the hibiscus hopped mead just to see what it's like and do it our own way. Do it with our ingredients, stuff that we grew at home. Maybe I'll even source the honey locally and get cherry, or not, it's not cherries anymore. Now it's just hibiscus and yeah. Anyway, source the mead, source the honey, because we know somebody who's a beekeeper, and see if maybe we can make a small batch of that, just a gallon or two. Because I tried the Viking Blood, and the first time I tried it, I went, this is okay. Then the second time I tried it, I went, I don't like this. Then the third time I tried it, it started out as, I don't like this at all. But by the time that bottle was empty, I kind of liked it. 19% alcohol will do that for you. Anyway, anything else you want to say?
My final note on this is that I get an interesting sensation that I don't get with most alcohols, and I attribute that a lot to the tart cherry, is that as I'm drinking it, the first sensation is the tartness, and it hits me right in the cheeks. And then as I let it stay in my mouth a little bit longer, the alcohol starts to affect my tongue. So
yeah, it might be a little stronger than 10.
I get physical sensations along with the aroma and the flavor sensation. So that's kind of interesting to me.
Here's my final word. It's just really good. Try it for yourself. If you try making this and you start running into troubles, feel free. Contact us through YouTube. I try to respond to them as quickly as possible. Sometimes it might take a couple days. I mean, we do actually have jobs and, do other things for a living for now, but someday we hope to be able to do this for a living. But that's a long way off. Anyway, but we try to answer whatever questions everybody has. We try to keep up with everything and keep them coming. Keep the comments coming. If you have suggestions for stuff you want to see me make, ask away. If I don't know how to do it, I'll do the research and figure it out and make it for you and tell you how I did it, give you all the ingredients along the way.
Again, thank you.
Have a great day. Bye, guys.